My name is Victor Lapointe. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer with the city of Ottawa, and if that work taught me one thing, it's this. Every structure has a load limit. You can add weight slowly, incrementally, and a well-built structure will carry it without complaint. But there's always a threshold, a point where the math stops working in your favor, and what looks solid starts to show stress fractures. I did not expect to apply that principle to my own family at Christmas, but here we are. Before I tell you what happened last December, I want to tell you about my wife. Helen taught kindergarten and grade 1 at St. Andrew's Public School in Canada for 26 years. Same hallway, same small chairs, same September smell of new crayons and hand sanitizer. She retired 2 years ago, and I'll say this plainly. The school didn't know what it was losing. She had a gift for finding the child who was struggling before the struggling became visible. She'd call parents on a Friday afternoon, not because something had gone wrong, but because she wanted to catch it before it did. 26 years of that. I watched her come home tired in the way people who've given a great deal get tired, not defeated, just poured out, and then get up and do it again. She is 64 years old, and she is the most capable, considerate, and quietly strong person I have ever known. She is also, and I say this with full awareness of what it cost her, someone who spent her career learning to make every situation easier for everyone around her. That habit doesn't disappear when you retire. Our son is 31. He works in corporate finance at a Bay Street firm in Toronto, Queen's for undergrad, Rotman for his MBA, and he has built his career the same way he built everything else. Carefully and with attention. He checks his assumptions. He measures twice. I am proud of him the way a father is proud when a son turns out to be a genuinely good man. He met his wife at a conference in Montreal 3 years ago. She was sharp, composed, funny, in that particular way that catches you off guard. She worked in client relations for a PR firm, and she was very good at it. She had a way of making things feel considered and intentional and effortless, and that quality extended to everything she touched. Her apartment, her wardrobe, her dinner parties. The dinner parties were, I would come to understand, the relevant detail. The pattern started quietly. It always does. The first Christmas after they married, she called Helen in October, not to ask, to outline. I'm thinking 20 people, cocktail hour first, then a seated dinner. Your butter tarts are legendary, so those are obviously a given. Not a question, just a statement with an assumption bolted to the end of it. Helen made the butter tarts. She also made a cranberry trifle, a Nanaimo bar tray, and 24 shortbread cookies because she had noticed once, 8 months earlier, that my daughter-in-law's mother liked shortbread. That's Helen. She keeps track. She does the extra thing without announcing it, because it doesn't occur to her not to. Nobody mentioned the Nanaimo bars. I noticed. I said something once, something mild early on, about the way requests arrived without question marks. Helen looked at me with the patient expression she reserved for that particular observation. She just has a direct way of communicating, she said. I let it go. I should not have let it go. I folded, the same way I was quietly bothered watching Helen fold, and that's worth sitting with. The autumn before the Christmas I'm telling you about, they had us over for Thanksgiving. Store-bought turkey from the Loblaws on Yonge, boxed stuffing, a tray of things from the prepared food section. I mention this not to criticize, but to note a pattern. She hosted when the situation called for it and served what was available. What she put on the table depended, I would later understand, entirely on who was watching. 6 weeks later, on a Thursday evening in mid-November, Helen came into the living room holding her phone. She didn't say anything, she just held it out. I read it. Hi, just finalizing the Christmas plan so we can coordinate. I'm thinking 22 guests. Here's what I'm working with for your contributions. The turkey, 18 to 20 pounds. Stuffing from scratch, your grandmother's recipe if you still have it. Mashed potatoes, enough for 20. You know how people go back for seconds. Green bean casserole, glazed carrots, roasted Brussels sprouts. Dinner rolls. Homemade ones really are so much better. The store-bought ones are always so dry. Cranberry sauce, fresh please, gravy, and for dessert, butter tarts. 3 dozen at least, tourtière. I know it's a big ask, but the Beaumont des Rosiers are coming, and they absolutely love it. And your apple pie. Also, if it's not too much trouble, a cheese board for when people arrive. Start time would be 7 a.m., so everything's ready by 2. Can't wait. I counted 12 items, 22 guests, 7 in the morning. I put the phone down on the coffee table. I picked it up again and read the last line one more time. Can't wait. Not a thank you, not a please, not even the pretense of a question. Just the cheerful certainty of someone who had filed a request and was now confirming the vendor. I looked at Helen. She was standing in the doorway with her arms folded, very still, in the way she got still, when she was deciding whether something was as bad as it looked. It was as bad as it looked. I'll call Ethan, I said. No, she said it quietly, but the word had weight. Let me try first. She texted back, that's quite a list for one person. Maybe we can divide some of this with the other guests? The reply came in 4 minutes. Oh, completely understand, but honestly, you're so much better at this than anyone else could be. Everyone's coming from out of town and I didn't want to pile on. You've absolutely got this. Helen read it. She set the phone face down on the coffee table. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. I am a practical man. I find that hot water helps. 2 Sundays before Christmas, they had us over for brunch. Bagels and lox from a deli on Bloor, cream cheese, smoked salmon. Nothing she had made herself. After brunch, Helen found a pause in the conversation and turned to her. I've been thinking about the dinner. There are a few things on the list I'd need help with. Maybe the tourtière could come from a good restaurant. Marché des Saveurs does a wonderful one. My daughter-in-law smiled. It was the particular smile of someone who has already closed that door internally and is managing the conversation around the fact. Honestly, a restaurant tourtière just isn't the same as homemade. The Beaumont des Rosiers are going to be there, and I want everything to feel authentic and personal. She reached across and touched Helen's hand. You always make it look so effortless. That's a genuine gift. My son looked at his bagel. He did not say a word. I had taught that boy to speak up when something wasn't right, to name the thing and not look away from it. He had developed, somewhere between 20 and 30, a talent for looking at the bagel instead. I kept my face neutral. I had spent 31 years in project meetings, where the right move was to gather information before deciding what to do with it. I was still gathering. On the drive home to Ottawa on the 401, I said to Helen, that's not happening. She looked out the window at the December dark. I know, she said, and then after a moment, I already know what I want to do. I looked at her, she was almost smiling. Tell me, I said. That night, Helen called Irene. Irene and Helen have known each other since their first year of Teachers College, which is 38 years ago now. Irene retired to Victoria 4 years ago, right after her husband passed. She lives in a small pale yellow house on Dallas Road near the water with a garden that gets more sun than anything in British Columbia has a right to. They talk every Sunday morning over coffee, the same as they have since the pandemic normalized video calls. I sat at the kitchen table while Helen was in the other room, and when she came back 20 minutes later, her expression had changed, settled, like something that had been loose had been properly fastened down. She sat across from me and put her hands flat on the table. Irene wants us for Christmas, she said. Her place. Roast duck, her mother's cabbage rolls, just the 3 of us. She says the harbor at Christmas is something you have to see. I said, when do we leave? She looked at me. Just like that? Helen, I said, she sent you a work order. 12 items, 22 people, 7 in the morning. Our son watched her do it and talked about his bagel. Irene is offering you a window seat looking at the Strait of Juan de Fuca at Christmas. I paused. What exactly is the decision here? She exhaled, a long, slow exhale like 3 weeks of tension deciding to leave the body all at once. She pulled a notepad across the table and wrote a few lines. She folded it once, left it beside her coffee cup. Then she opened her laptop. I watched her go to the Via Rail website. I watched her find the morning train from Ottawa to Toronto and the connection to the Canadian, the overnight service across the country to Vancouver, then the ferry to Victoria. 2 tickets. She looked up at me. I nodded once. She pressed confirm. Before I go on, if this is your first time here, take a moment to subscribe and hit like, and drop your city and the time it is where you are in the comments. I read every single one. The text kept arriving all week. Monday, quick reminder, can you use unsalted butter in the shortbread? Margot has a sodium sensitivity. Can you also double the batch? Last year they went so fast. Who was Margot? First I'd heard of her. Wednesday. Also, the Beaumont des Rosiers mentioned they'd prefer gluten-free pastry if possible. If the tortilla crust is too complicated, just say so and I'll figure something out. She did not figure something out. Friday evening, while I was clearing the driveway of the first real snowfall of the season. One more thing, I booked a caterer for the appetizer portion, but they're not covering the mains. So everything on the dinner list is still yours. Just wanted to be transparent. A caterer for the appetizers, but not for the mains. I stood in my driveway holding a snow shovel and read that sentence 3 times. 4 days later, Helen called me from the car on her way back from a neighbor's. She'd stopped in at a Williams Coffee and run into someone from Ethan's firm. She mentioned she was looking forward to Christmas at their place, Victor. Helen paused. She said, "Priya told us your wife handles all the cooking. We're so excited to finally taste it. She says it's better than any restaurant in the city." I sat with that for a moment. I went back over everything. The tourtière the Beaumont des Rosiers would love, the cheese board for when people arrive, Margot's sodium sensitivity, the caterer covering appetizers, the visible, photographable portion of the evening, the 22 guests, which now included colleagues from my son's firm. This was not a family Christmas dinner. This was a professionally orchestrated event, a staged impression designed for an audience that included my son's managing director, and the element she had decided was load-bearing, the thing the entire structure depended on, the thing she hadn't asked for, because she'd already assumed it was hers to use, was my wife. There is a term in structural engineering for a wall that looks like it's holding something up, but isn't doing anything useful at all. A partition. It defines a space without actually bearing any load. You don't know it's false until you test it and find the ceiling doesn't move. My daughter-in-law had built a family Christmas that was actually a professional showcase, and she'd quietly decided that my wife was the load-bearing element, without ever asking whether the structure had been designed to carry that much. That evening, I called my son. Helen had asked me not to, and I had waited until she told me it was all right. He picked up on the first ring. I kept it short. "Your mother has been given a 12-item list for 22 people with a 7 a.m. start and no help. She said it was too much. You said nothing. I'm telling you directly. Fix it." A pause. "Dad, I hear you, but the invitations have already gone out and—" "Ethan." Another pause. "She's been planning this for a long time. It's really important to her." I had been in enough project meetings to recognize a man repeating someone else's words. Those were not his. They were preloaded and waiting. "What's important to me," I said, "is your mother. Figure it out." "Dad, I really think if you could just—" And I said, "I love you, good night." And I hung up. Helen was at the kitchen table when I came back in. She read my face. "He's not ready to hear it yet," she said. "He will be," I said. She nodded, stood, went to the hall closet, and came back with her suitcase. She set it on the bed and looked at it. Then she started to pack. "I want to tell you about a coffee mug. It's a plain blue one, from a museum gift shop in Quebec City, where we spent a long weekend for our 25th anniversary in the middle of winter, when the old city smelled like wood smoke and fresh bread. I bought it because Helen admired it in the window. It's been on the same hook in our kitchen ever since, the mug she reaches for every morning. Nothing remarkable about it. Except that it was there every morning while she made coffee, and I had made a habit over the years of being in the kitchen when she did. Not always doing something useful, just being there. That was the thing my daughter-in-law had never understood, not just the labor, the company. The evening before we left, while Helen was finishing packing, I went to the kitchen. I stood at the counter and looked at the blue mug on its hook. I thought about 32 Christmases in this kitchen, the turkey going in early, CBC Radio 1 playing low, Helen singing under her breath to something she half remembered. I put the kettle on, I made 2 cups of tea and brought them to the bedroom. When I came back to the kitchen later that night, Helen was already at the table. The notepad was open. 4 lines written, folded once, left sitting like something that had already made up its mind. She unfolded it now and smoothed it flat with her palm. I read it over her shoulder. "Ethan, we love you. That hasn't changed and it won't. But we can't cook Christmas dinner for 22 people alone. We said so, and no one heard us. We're spending Christmas with Irene. We'll be home on the 27th. The kitchen is yours. Love, Mum and Dad." She had already added, "and Dad" at the bottom, in ink slightly different from the rest. She set the note in the center of the kitchen island. She reached up and lifted the blue museum mug off its hook. She placed it gently on top of the note, like a paperweight that knew what it was doing. We stood in the kitchen together for a moment, lights on, house quiet. "We're going to hear about this," I said. "Yes," she said. "Ethan's going to be upset." "Yes." I looked at her, 32 years of marriage, and she still had a way of looking back at me that said more than most people could fit into a paragraph. "Ready?" I said. "I've been ready for 2 weeks," she said. I turned off the kitchen light. She carried her suitcase to the front door. I carried mine. We called a cab together, standing side by side in the front hallway, and waited in the particular stillness of people who have made a decision and are now simply letting it happen. Ottawa in mid-December at 4:30 in the morning is a different city, cold in the way that makes the air feel sharp and precise, like glass. The train station was warm and half empty. I bought us both Tim Hortons from the counter, double for me, steep tea for Helen, and we sat with our luggage and drank them without saying much. Helen's phone had 3 unread messages from my daughter-in-law, sent after midnight, reminders, specific oven temperatures, an emoji of a Christmas tree. Neither of us opened them. When they called our train, I thought, right now, 22 people believe a Christmas dinner is being prepared for them. In a few hours, someone is going to walk into a kitchen and find a note under a blue museum mug. My phone buzzed as we stepped onto the platform. A text from Ethan. "Hey Dad, swinging by tomorrow around 9 to grab you and Mum. She wants her there by 10 to get started. See you then." He didn't know yet. I put the phone in my coat pocket. We found our seats. Helen took the window. The train pulled out of Ottawa just before 6 in the morning, and when we crossed the river and I watched the city easing away behind us in the gray December light, Helen put her hand over mine on the armrest. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. Irene was waiting at Victoria Harbor with 2 cups of coffee from a place near her house, and the expression of someone who has known your wife for 38 years and understands, without any explanation, exactly what has happened. She hugged Helen first. Then she looked at me. "Victor, you actually came." "Why wouldn't I?" "I thought Helen might talk you out of it on the ferry." "She tried," I said. Helen looked at me. "Once," I added. We drove to Dallas Road with the windows cracked. The air was green and salt damp in a way that Ottawa in December makes you forget exists. Irene's house was small and pale yellow, with a climbing rose gone dormant over the porch. A fat tabby cat named Beaumont observed our arrival from the windowsill, with the absolute indifference of someone whose hospitality has not been solicited. Helen's phone began to go off in the cup holder. I turned it face down. Irene said, "It won't stop." "It'll stop when it stops," I said. She handed me more coffee. I sat back and looked at the water, and I thought, somewhere in Toronto right now, there is a kitchen with a note under a blue mug and no turkey on the counter. My son told us what happened afterward in pieces, over the following days. I'll tell you what I know. At 9:45 on Christmas Eve morning, my daughter-in-law came downstairs in a white linen apron she'd ordered specifically for the occasion and walked into a kitchen that was exactly as I'd left it. Dark, cold, no turkey, no prep work, no smell of anything cooking. Just the island, and on it a blue museum mug and under it a folded piece of notepaper. She picked it up, she read it. Ethan came downstairs and found her standing there, still holding the note. He read it. He called me. I didn't answer. He called Helen. No answer. He called me again. He texted. He tried our home line in Ottawa on the possibility that we were sitting there in the dark, having somehow lost both our phones simultaneously. Then he called his sister-in-law. She arrived at 10:15, still in her coat. "Can you cook a turkey?" She had never cooked a turkey in her life. Her boyfriend offered to look it up on YouTube. Nobody took him up on it. 22 people had confirmed. The floral arrangement had been delivered the day before. Ethan's managing director and his wife had replied to the invitation within the hour of receiving it. My son drove to the superstore at 11. The Christmas turkey section had been picked clean since the weekend. 2 frozen birds remained at the back of the shelf, both too large to thaw safely in time. He came home with 3 rotisserie chickens from the prepared food counter, a container of pre-made mashed potatoes, a bag of frozen dinner rolls, a ready-made cranberry sauce, a Yule log cake from the bakery, and a wedge of brie with crackers. Because he remembered, at the last moment, that there was supposed to be a cheese board. The tourtière never happened. The glazed carrots did not happen. The 3 dozen butter tarts remained unmade. Guests arrived at 2. Ethan's managing director came at 2:15 with his wife, a bottle of Niagara Chardonnay, and the precise punctuality of someone attending something professionally adjacent who has calculated exactly how long they intend to stay. The table was beautiful. I'll give her that honestly and without reservation. She had a real eye for how a room should feel. The greens and white, the candles at each setting, the afternoon light coming through the windows. She had put genuine care into how it looked. Then the food came out. 3 rotisserie chickens on her good china platters, pre-made mashed potatoes, slightly gray in the candlelight. Frozen rolls cool in the middle, the Yule log on a cake stand, the grocery sticker removed but its faint impression still visible in the cardboard sleeve. The managing director's wife set her wine glass down carefully and said nothing for a moment. Then, "It all looks lovely." She looked at the chicken. She looked at it again. My daughter-in-law smiled at the table and said there had been a last-minute change in plans. Her in-laws hadn't been able to make it. In the kitchen, Ethan stood at the counter with his back to the room. He had known it was too much. He had told himself it wasn't worth making into a fight. He had said nothing when he should have spoken, because the easier path had always been right there. Standing in front of 3 superstore chickens on his wife's good china at Christmas, he understood, in his body, in the way things land when they finally stop bouncing off the surface, what his silence had actually meant. On Dallas Road in Victoria, the afternoon was doing something remarkable with the light. Irene had made roast duck, her grandmother's recipe, with oranges and fresh thyme from the garden, cooked with the kind of attention that makes simple food taste like a considered decision. We had it with real mashed potatoes, proper buttered lumpy ones, and her mother's cabbage rolls, and a salad from her garden. We ate at the table by the window that faced the strait. The water was silver green, and the mountains on the far side were just visible through a low band of cloud. Beaumont had migrated from the windowsill to the back of my chair, where he presided with the authority of a cat who considers all spatial arrangements advisory. I was telling Irene about a retaining wall project I'd consulted on before I retired. Up near Fort Smith, unexpected permafrost variation, 3 separate design revisions, when Helen's phone lit up on the table. My daughter-in-law. Helen looked at the phone, then at me, then at Irene. Irene looked at her duck. Helen picked up. "Mum." Her voice was pitched higher than usual, tight at the edges. "Do you know what's happening here right now? Do you have any idea? Anton is here, Ethan's managing director, and there is nothing ready. You could have at least told someone." Helen set her fork on the rim of her plate. She looked out at the water. "I told you I couldn't do it alone," she said. Her voice was exactly what it always was in difficult conversations, clear, unhurried, finished negotiating. "I said so 3 weeks before Christmas. I said it again at brunch. Victor called Ethan directly. No one made room for it, so we made other arrangements." A silence on the line. "That is incredibly selfish." "We'll be home on the 27th, Helen said. "I hope the rest of your evening goes well." She hung up. Irene refilled her wine without being asked. Have you ever told someone a hard truth and watched them choose not to hear it? Drop a comment if you know exactly what that feels like. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is a good moment. Because what happens next is the part that matters most. 20 seconds after Helen hung up, my phone rang. "Ethan," I answered. He didn't speak right away. I could hear him outside, the muffled warmth of the party through a closed door, then just the cold air and the quiet of a backyard in December. "Dad." His voice had changed. The prepared edge was gone. What was underneath it was quieter, the sound of a man who has stopped performing and started feeling. I don't know what to say. I knew it was too much. I kept telling myself it wasn't worth a fight, that everything would sort itself out, that you'd both just... He stopped. I said nothing when I should have spoken. "I'm sorry, Dad. Tell Mom I'm sorry." I believed him. My son had never been dishonest with me. He had chosen the easier path, kept quiet to avoid immediate friction, let things slide because confrontation felt costly. That was a failure of courage, not character. There is a difference, and I had made the same failure earlier in this story. He came by it honestly. "I know," I said. "We'll talk when we're home. Go take care of your guests." A pause. "Is the food good?" I looked at what was in front of me. The duck, dark and fragrant and properly rested. The cabbage rolls with their sweet tomato sauce. The water going silver outside. Beaumont with his chin on the back of my chair. It's wonderful, I said. Irene made her grandmother's duck. A long pause. Good, Dad. He almost steadied himself over the phone. Good. Go, I said. We'll see you on the 27th. After I set the phone down, Helen looked at me across the table. She picked up her fork. Duck? Irene said. Yes, I said. Please. Ethan told us the rest in pieces over the following days. The managing director stayed 2.5 hours. He was pleasant throughout in exact proportion to how well a situation was going. Not cold when things went wrong, just measured, giving somewhat less of himself than he might have in a different room. He ate the chicken without complaint and complimented the centerpiece, which genuinely deserved it. His wife said to Ethan quietly, at one point, "Your parents usually cook, don't they? Are they all right?" Ethan said they'd had a prior commitment they couldn't move, which was true. My daughter-in-law, from across the table, said there had been a last-minute change of plans. Also true, depending on your definition of last minute. The two explanations didn't quite line up. By about 45 degrees, the way improvised stories don't, when two people are solving the same problem from different angles and haven't compared notes. Guests left by 5:30. Earlier than a Christmas dinner usually ends. Earlier than it would have ended if a kitchen had been running since 7 in the morning. And with the warmth that builds in a house when someone has been cooking in it all day. After everyone left, Ethan did the dishes. He told me it was the first time he'd washed up after a large family gathering. That surprised me until I thought about it, and then it didn't. Helen had always done it. Standing at the sink, my daughter-in-law came in and said he should have called us more, pushed harder to get us there. He turned off the water. "I did call them," he said. "They told me it was too much." A pause. "You knew," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I knew." He turned the water back on. She left the kitchen. She didn't post anything to Instagram that evening. She'd taken photographs earlier. The table before the food, the arrangement, the candles. They stayed in her camera roll. The managing director's next message to Ethan was a routine January note about a project timeline. He did not mention Christmas. We flew home on the 27th, via to Toronto, then the connector back to Ottawa. The city came back gray and salt-stained in the particular shade of late December that makes you understand clearly why Victoria exists. Our car was in the driveway. Ethan's was at the curb. He was sitting on our front steps. He had driven 4 hours from Toronto without calling ahead. That told me everything. A phone call is managed and considered. Sitting on someone's steps in the cold, without warning, means you've decided a phone call isn't enough. He stood when I came up the walk. We looked at each other. He had the look of a man who'd spent several days being honest with himself about something difficult and hadn't slept well through any of it. "She didn't come," he said. "Okay," I said. We went inside. Helen had come in through the side door a few minutes ahead of me, and the kettle was already on. We sat at the kitchen table, the same chairs, the same spots we'd used for 30 years. The blue museum mug was still in Victoria, because we'd forgotten to pack it, and Irene had insisted on keeping it until our next visit. Ethan sat across from us with his hands around his tea and said, "I knew it was too much, and I said nothing. I kept telling myself it wasn't worth a fight, that you'd both just manage, that everything would be fine. I let her treat you both like your time was simply available, like it would always be there." He stopped. "It wasn't the right call. I knew it and I did it anyway." "No," I said, "it wasn't." He had expected more scaffolding around that. I didn't have any to offer. Helen put her hand over his on the table. "We love you," she said. "That's not in question and it never will be, but we won't be made invisible for someone else's convenience, not even for yours." "I hear you," he said. "Good," she said, and poured the tea. We sat there for a while without filling the silence. It was the kind of quiet that only arrives after something true has been said and actually received. The quiet on the other side of a real conversation, when everyone has stopped performing. It was the best hour we'd had together in 2 years. "My daughter-in-law called on the 29th, I answered. "I want you to know," she said, "that what you did was really hurtful." "I understand it felt that way," I said. "And I'd like you to understand that when you send someone a 12-item cooking list and call it a family Christmas, That's hurtful too. We can talk about this honestly, or we can leave it here. Your choice. A silence. She hung up. She called back 2 days later. This time, she talked less and listened more. She asked how the ferry crossing was. Said Victoria sounded beautiful in winter. Said she'd been thinking. She didn't apologize in those exact words, but she asked questions. For the first time in 3 years, she asked questions instead of issuing instructions. And I recognized that as the closest thing to an opening we were going to get. Helen took the next call. They talked for 14 minutes, longer than they had ever spoken. Helen told me afterward, without a single task being assigned. There was no grand resolution, no room where everyone wept and pledged to become different people. That is not how families work. What changed was more functional than that. An assumption had been removed. The assumption that Helen's time, Helen's skills, and Helen's presence were simply available. On demand indefinitely, without discussion. That was gone. And without it, things had to be negotiated, which meant they had to be talked about, which meant everyone had to act like people with actual choices. That was enough. Ethan started calling more often in January, not to update us on decisions already made, but to ask. Small things consistently, they add up. Helen signed up for a watercolor class at the community center on Thursday mornings. She'd been wanting to for over a year and kept putting it off, because there was always something someone else needed first. We booked Victoria again for March. Irene was already planning which botanical garden we'd visit. One Saturday morning in February, I made waffles from scratch, the Belgian kind with pearl sugar, the way I used to make them when Ethan was small. Helen poured coffee and sat at the counter with her hands around her mug, and we did not talk about Christmas or my daughter-in-law or any of it. We just had breakfast. The snow was coming down outside in the slow, soft way it does in Ottawa when the wind drops, and the kitchen was warm, and there was nowhere either of us needed to be. I stood at the stove and thought, this is what it was always supposed to be. The two of us in this kitchen on a Saturday morning, the snow outside, the coffee ready, nowhere we have to go. This right here. About 3 weeks after we got back, Helen was reorganizing the hall closet and pulled down a shoebox from the top shelf. We brought it to the kitchen table and went through it together. The usual archaeology of a long life shared. Birthday cards. School photos of Ethan at various ages of mild self-consciousness. A parking stub from a trip to Halifax that neither of us could date with any confidence. Near the bottom, Helen held up a photograph. It was Christmas, maybe 12, 13 years ago, based on how the kitchen looked before we repainted. She was at the stove. I was standing behind her, arms loose around her shoulders, my chin tilted toward her hair. We were both laughing. I don't know at what. The timer was probably about to go off. One of us had said something that landed exactly right. I didn't remember being photographed, but I remembered how it felt to be there. Not watching from the doorway, not stepping in only for the moments that required me and retreating for the rest. Just in it. All of it. Because she should not have been alone in that kitchen. Because she had never asked me to be there, which made it more important, not less. That was the thing my daughter-in-law had missed. That was the thing my son had forgotten somewhere along the way, and had to learn again by standing in front of 3 grocery store chickens on Christmas Eve. You don't send someone you love a work order, you show up. Helen set the photograph on the counter between us. We should have gone to Victoria years ago, she said. We're exactly where we were supposed to be, I said, until we weren't. She looked at me. That's very philosophical for a Saturday. I'm a deep man, Helen. She laughed. And I thought, that's what the 32 years were for, not to produce Christmas dinners for professional networking events. To produce this, the two of us in our kitchen on a Saturday morning, the photograph on the counter, a laugh about nothing in particular, and nowhere in the world we had to be.